Okay, we are on this is Samach Zayin Amud Beis, toward the end of the page. We'll learn a little bit more about different types of iska relationships. Iska is a business, and different types of mashkanta. Mashkanta, we said again, was a loan with a collateral, but the collateral is handed over to the lender for the period of the loan. I would say there was two types of collaterals. There was a mashkanta de solek, a collateral where the borrower could remove the lender by making an early payment. There's mashkanta de loy solek, a type of collateralized loan where the borrower cannot remove the lender. The lender's period to use the property is fixed for the length of the contract. We said a mashkanta de loy solek, a collateralized loan where you cannot remove the lender, is considered like a sale, like a mechar, and therefore there's no ribis. Okay. Now we learned about something called nechaisa. Nechaisa was a debatable. There was two opinions whether nechaisa was permissible or not permissible in the scenario of a mashkanta de solek. Again, you have a collateralized loan. The lender gets to keep the collateral, its property, and to enjoy the benefits. And the agreement goes as follows: for every year that the lender is on the property, the loan is reduced by a fixed amount. Now, of course, that's a risk proposition, because the income the lender earns from the property may or may not be equal to the agreed upon reduction in the loan, and therefore, according to one opinion, it's permissible. According to another opinion, it's not permissible. We saw yesterday there was a debate. 5 lines in the bottom of the page. Rav Kahana, Rav Papa, Rav Ashi, lo yachli b'nechaisa. Rav Kahana, Rav Papa, Rav Ashi did not permit nechaisa, or more accurately, we should say they did not rely on it for themselves. Ravina achal b'nechaisa, however, Ravina did rely on nechaisa. Again, nechaisa is a fixed reduction in the loan. Amar Mar Zutra, my time of demand achal b'nechaisa. What's the opinion of the opinion that says that you're allowed to use nechaisa? You're allowed to use a fixed reduction for every year the lender occupies the property. It's no different than a steachuza. Okay, rough, just without going into too much detail, steachuza basically is a guy who gifts his property to hektish. And every year, the Torah gives a fixed amount of redemption for a field that's a given size, what we call a it's a base zera chaymer sarim. For every certain amount of square feet, there's a fixed redemption. It's one coin for every, a little more than a coin for every year. So it's 50 coins for 49 years. 50 shkolim for 49 years. Okay, so that and what happens every year? There's a fixed reduction. Who gets to eat the fruit? Hektish gets to eat the fruit. So the guy gives the property to Hektish. Hektish enjoys the benefit, so to speak, like a lender, and the one who sanctified it is like a borrower who gets a fixed reduction every year. And Hakanami. I'm sorry?
The one who
sanctifies that and redeems it is like the borrower, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So the redemption value is fixed amount of every year. If the redemption value decreases by a fixed amount, so it's just like the chais is based. It's a very similar type of relationship. There's the ability to redeem the property, and there's a fixed value a fixed reduction that's given for every year that the lender occupies the property. What about the opinion that holds it's prohibited? They argue there's a fundamental distinction, which is the distinction we've noted many times. The mashkanta is set up like a loan, and that's the critical problem, because a loan is where ribis deraisa exists. Hektish is not set up like a loan; it's set up like a hektish. You're giving a gift to the temple. You have the ability to redeem it. So therefore, just because we have a leniency that looks like nechaisa by hektish does not mean we can apply the same leniency to something structured as a loan. Amar Rashi says, Amrli Sabi de Masa Mechasya. The elders of Masa Mechasya taught me a few things about life, about financial relationships. The first one is Stam Mashkanta Shata. The normal length of a mashkanta is a year. Okay, what does this mean? The Shata Matzim Misalakle. The Matzim Misalakle. It means that in the mashkanta relationship, the lender must occupy the property for at least a year. Until a year, there is no possibility of redemption. But the minimum is even in a mashkanta the solak, even in a place where early payment is permitted. Just clarify here again. Permitted doesn't mean permitted. It means this is not a matter of Torah prohibitions. It's a matter of custom in the town. So if the custom of the town was to allow early payments, still the lender occupies the property for a year. Then afterwards, early payment is possible. But to pay it up a week after you borrow the money, no, not allowed. Okay, for Amar Vashi, another thing, another thing the elders of Masam Chasya taught me. My mashkanta, what does mashkanta mean? It means I'm the best neighbor. What does that mean? Like, who really cares how good of a neighbor you are? No, it does make a difference. Ladina de bavametzia. We've spoken about Dina de bavametzia briefly before. We'll get to it more in Bava Basra. Again, briefly, bavametzia is as follows. The law is that a neighbor of a property is entitled to match any offer made for the property, with few exceptions. So if my neighbor wants to sell his, just to be clear, without getting into too technical and debates here, the traditional Dina de bavametzia is I own my house, you own your house, you're my neighbor, and you want to sell your property, you have an offer on the table, I'm allowed to match the offer and take the property. And the idea is it's like a security feature. I don't know who's going to be my new neighbor, and the rabbis gave first rights for the neighbors to buy the property first. However, if you own the property by mashkanta, and in other words, the lender is sitting on the property because of the mashkanta, and now the borrower decides, you know what, I'm not interested in this nechaisa, I'm selling the property and paying him back. The one who has first dibs in the property is the mashkanta holder. The lender. So he has more rights than a neighbor. Okay, now we get to a few categories. Rava says, the halacha does not follow the sale of pupunoi, we'll explain. And not like the documents of the mechuzians. And not like the chachirus, we'll explain what that means, of the narshom. What does that mean? Okay, let's get to it. Kitroshi pupanoi, like the sale of pupanoi, kitroshi or pupple. So this is like the sale of a pupple. Let's go back. If you remember, this was probably about a week ago, a little less than a week ago. Wednesday, maybe last week. We spoke about Rapapa. What did Rapapa say? This was a question about early bird specials. So Rapapa said, my early bird special is permitted. Why? Because Rapapa would sell this beer, right? And what he would do is the beer apparently was cheaper in Sukkot's time and more expensive Nisan time. So what he'd do is he'd sell at Sukkot's time for the Nisan price, and he'd allow them to pay until Nisan. And he argued, look, I don't need the money. I'm rich. Rapapa was a rich man anyway. And they prefer to hang on to it till Nisan and pay me Nisan, so that's fine. Now, Rav Shesh's counter to that, he said, yeah, it's true that from your perspective, this is not ribbis. However, from the perspective of the buyer, it certainly is ribbis. Because had he had the money today, he wouldn't have bought from you at Nisan prices. He would have bought from you at today's prices. So therefore, it's prohibited. And the halacha does not follow Rav Papa. You're not allowed to do the sale of Rav Papa. Rav Sheshis was correct in criticizing Rav Papa. Next, Shtori Mechuznoi, the Mechuzian document. What does that mean? Okay, basically, this is sort of a broker type of relationship. So you have the investor. The investor owns, I don't know, the investor's a pawnbroker, let's say. So he buys all sorts of interesting trinkets, and he hands it over to a broker to sell the trinkets. And the arrangement is 50% of the difference between my cost and your profit is mine, and the other 50% is yours. I had a relative who used to do this. He would go to people that had things to get rid of, and he would agree to sell them on eBay. And the arrangement was you had to give him 30 to 50% of the profit, depending on the item. Okay, so what would they do? That's perfectly fine with it. None of this is problematic. The problem was, so the pawnbroker would say he would have a $50 trinket whose estimated retail sale price was $100. So he'd hand it over to the broker. The pawn owner, the pawn dealer would hand it over to the broker and the broker would write him out a document, I owe you 75. The problem with that is that who said it will actually sell for 100? You're already presuming that it's going to be $100, $50 profit, and will be split. It's not allowed because who said there'll be a profit? By locking in the profit, you're locking in a ribis. We'll explain this in a moment. We'll explain this as we get further. I guess we'll start now. How do we understand this relationship, this broker relationship? The answer is like this. The $50 trinket, it's considered half of a pekodin, half of it is a milva. Half of it is a loan, half of it is an entrusted item. And therefore, let's say the item is lost or stolen. What's the law? You're halfway responsible. Now, on the half that's a loan, we'll soon see actually, what you're doing is, again, so I'm the pawnbroker, you're the dealer, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're the broker. I'm the pawn dealer, you're the broker. So I have a $50 trinket. You are now responsible for 25. My 25 though is a loan to you. Right? So now you sell the item. You get to keep the $25 profit on the $25 profit that you accepted responsibility, which is perfectly fine. And on my $25 profit, you hand me back the money. It's a loan. Make sense? However, we'll soon see that 1 second, this is also ribis. Why? Because for you engaging on my half, you're not being compensated for that engagement. In other words, the profit that you keep, fine, but you're working for me without pay. Right?
Mm-hmm.
You're working to sell. I gave you a loan, and you have to pay me back the loan plus a little bit, which is fine because that little bit is not your interest payment. But your interest payment is the work. The fact that you're working on it. We'll soon see that I have to pay you a fee for that service, for that labor. We'll soon see how much the fee has to be. By the way, every heteriska has it's written down. Part of the heteriska again is a way of transforming a loan into a so-called sale. Really, ideally, you would think of it as a sale, a joint venture, a business that is a so-called loan, because it functions like a loan, but it really is a business. And one of the features of this is that I have to give the borrower $1 because he's working, he's doing the work. So he is doing the work, he's entitled to payment for that. So it should not be ribis. Now, regardless, the Mechuzians made a mistake here because they guarantee the profits. There's no guarantee of profits, but guaranteeing the profits, that is a guarantee of ribis. We're locking in a fixed profit for the lender side, but not for the pekodin side, not for the watchman side. That's the half that you're responsible for. Okay, so me the have Rav. So Mar, the son of Amemar, says to Rav Ashi, Abba Ovid Hachi. My father used to do this mechuzian documents. So what happened was he'd advance them the trinket for $50, right? They would sell the trinket and they'd write a document saying, here's a loan for 75. And then once the item was sold, they'd give them the 75, they'd keep 25 for themselves. And but the arrangement was as follows. Let's say the item didn't sell for 100. It sold for 80. So what would the deal be? The deal would be that he would refund them $80 of $30 profit. It's 15. So he'd take 65 and he'd give the other guy 15. So Rav Ashi says it's not okay. He says, I don't care what your father does. It's not a good arrangement. Why? Well, if your father is alive, okay, fine. So there won't be any ribis. But what happens if your father dies? Then the orphans are not going to know what exactly the arrangement was. So he's sort of setting himself up for ribis. And he wasn't happy with that. It was like the mistake that the king made and Amemer died. As he said, what if your father dies? And that was sort of a God is extremely exacting with the speech of great rabbis, and because he considered the possibility what actually happened was that Amemer died. Okay. Chakiri Narshoi, the Chakiris of Narshoi. This is an extremely clever affair. And this is basically a way of ensuring, this is a way of really you can do real ribbis with this. Absolute real ribbis. What do they do? The Kasvi Hachi, this is what they do. Mashkle Planya, Ari Planya. So I'll be the borrower, Steve will be the lender, and Steve lends me property. I give him back the collateral. So he lends me money, I give him back collateral. Okay, so this was an achaisa relationship, let's say. In other words, Steve agrees to reduce my burden every year by $1,000. But then Steve has to plant the field and work it. Steve is not interested in planting the field. He wants the ribbis. He wants the interest. So what he does is he hires me, the borrower, to take care of his field at a fixed fee. Meaning, so there's different. So let's explain it for a moment. Let's say Steve's a farmer and he needs somebody to farm his field. So there's different relationships you can engage in. One type of relationship is called arisos, a sharecropper. Mm-hmm. A sharecropper puts down no investment, but he takes a certain percentage of the field, depending on what grows. If it's a very successful year, a bumper crop, he might have more money. If it's less, he might have less. Another type of relationship is called chakiros. Chakiros is that the farmer, the worker, pays a fee to you. He pays you a fixed amount of money, and then whatever grows in the field is his. Whether it might be it might be a very successful deal, it might actually be a total failure if there's a drought. Mm-hmm. So Steve is going to hire me as a chayker with a fee that's way larger than the nechaisa. So he reduces my loan every year by $1,000, but I also have to pay him $5,000 a year to farm his property, and I can keep whatever grows. So the $4,000 a year is the ribbis payment. Okay. So the Gemara says this is not prohibited. Why? Because because the way this relationship was structured, it was sort of all in one document. It's a joke, basically. Right? It's a joke. Yeah. Okay. It's all in one document. There's two features here happening at the same time. In other words, basically, there's a way to do ribbis. It's not permitted. Why? Because Stephen never got the property to decide whether he was going to farm it to hire me as a chaycher. Okay. Today they do this. How do they do it? So today, at the time of the Talmud, there was a thought that we have to allow certain loans to go through. So the rabbis allowed this. How do they allow it? They said Steve has to farm the field for a couple of days, maybe a couple of months. Then afterwards, he could sign on to this chaycher deal. So we couldn't do it basically in one contract. That's already too much. So Gemara says that they allowed that, but V'lav Milsi, but it was incorrect. It is not allowed. Steve is not allowed to hire me as the borrower, to be the chaycher. Can hire anybody else, not me. It's too close to ribbis. To ribbis. Okay, now we get to Iska. Again, we already started Iska. We explained Iska with the example of the pawnbroker, right? He buys trinkets and sells them for a profit. And the agreement is that the broker who handles the deal gets 50% of the profit. So it was similar. This was a common structure for a lot of different types of occupations, different fields of business. Okay, so for example, I'm sorry?
I said still not that uncommon.
What, this type of relationship?
Brokerage.
Yeah, sure. So okay. There's two ways to structure this deal. A chenveni, you might think of him as a peddler or a grocery store operator. Mm-hmm. So he has a grocery store. What does he do? He buys in bulk and sells in small. It's a very common business model. Mm-hmm. And so what's the deal? Two ways to do this. Number one is so the first way is I give him a pallet of apples. He sells them by the pound. right? So the arrangement is a pallet of apples costs, I don't know, 1,000. It's amazing. You go to the factories, you see how much, like when you buy in bulk, things are so cheap. When you buy in small quantities, they're so expensive.
Yeah.
And especially in things that are perishable, because you really can't buy in bulk unless you have a way to use it. Otherwise, it's going to spoil. So he buys a pallet for, it's got 2,000 pounds in it. He buys it for, I don't know, $500, and he sells it for $1 a pound. So if he sells the whole pallet, it's going to be 2,000 pounds. He'll make $1,500 in profit. Just to square out the numbers, we'll say it's 1,000 and 1,000. So he'll buy the pallet for 1,000, he'll sell it for another 1,000, and they'll split the profit. 50% is going to go to the investor, that's the guy who owns the pallet of apples. 50% goes to the grocery store owner, the guy who's selling it. Or another way to do this is to just give the guy money. Here's $1,000 to go buy a pallet. These are two ways to structure the relationship with the grocery store owner. Both of these are prohibited. You have to pay him like a worker. Again, like we explained before, the problem here is, so the grocery store guy, he's responsible for half the pallet. The other half of the pallet he's not responsible for is a loan. That's why he's not really responsible for it, because it belongs to me, the investor. So the fact that they both share in the profit, there's nothing wrong with that. Each person's taking the profits on their half of the deal. My half of responsibility gives me half of the profits of that responsibility, and his half of the loan gives him his half of the profits of that loan, which I didn't pay. It's the buyers that are paying it. The people that buy from my shop are the ones paying for it. Okay, now the problem here is, though, the ribis is the fact that he is the one who's he's wheeling dealing it. He's doing the work. The grocery store is doing the work on behalf of the investor. So therefore, that's a ribis payment. So what do? You have to pay him like a worker. How much you have to pay him, we'll get to it. Okay. Similarly, so these are I think you might call them ranchers today. These ranchers are either are farming chicken, they're chicken farmers, or they're ranching. Agolim is calves, or siyachim is goats. Lemechza. So for half, again, so you have an investor here. He provides the young animals. You have the rancher that raises the animals. And the same type of relationship. The rancher gets half the profits once they're sold as more mature than they currently are, either as mature children or as adults. And you have to pay the rancher. The rancher here also has to make investments. He has to feed the animals. So you have to pay something commensurate for the feed and for the work. Okay, 1 second. Okay, the last line we'll have to explore later. Basically, this is an arrangement without any responsibility sharing. So the investor hands over the young cattle or the young goats, and he does not. The rancher takes no responsibility whatsoever, and they agree to share the profits. This is permitted even without payment.
Forget about us.
Okay.
Not even if I try.
Okay. Now, okay. So Eric came just in time for the investors. Yeah, it's with Yiska. Just very quickly here. We'll be on Samaches and Aleph, Samaches and Beis.
It's all a bunch of herds of stuff husband out there.
Very briefly here, the investment works as follows. There's an investor. He gives a pallet of apples or a cat or some cattle, some calves, and the rancher or the grocery store owner sells either they raise the cattle and sell them as adults, or they sell the apples in the pallet, and the profit split equally, and the responsibility is also equally shared. If the pallet of apples burns, then the grocery store owner is responsible for half, and the investor is responsible for half as well.
Right.
And this only works, we consider this half a loan, half a picadon, half responsibility. That's why half of the profit can go to the lender, half the profit goes to the grocery store owner, who he has the picadon, he has the responsibility. But this relationship is only permitted if you pay him for the fact that he's working. Otherwise, it's ribbis. The ribbis payment is the work. How much do you have to pay him? Bottom of Samach Ches Amud Aleph, 68a.
You have to pay a
Tana-
manager, in other words.
You have to pay him a managing fee. Yeah,
Right,
that's a
okay.
good way to say it. Yeah. Tonic a pile bottle. You pay him like a worker that doesn't really work. So Gemara says, Mike a pile bottle. What exactly does that mean? So Amar Abaye, a pile bottle sho'oisam malach. Okay, meaning let's say the guy was a blacksmith. So a blacksmith is obviously quite a more difficult task to do than to work in the grocery store. It's a much easier task. So the you merely need to pay him for the fact that he'll earn less, but he has an easier job. So you have a blacksmith, he earns $50 an hour. You have a grocery store guy, he earns $20 an hour. How much would somebody agree to reduce his salary to have an easier job? So obviously, if you have a blacksmith, you tell me he doesn't want to be a grocery store, he doesn't want to make $20 an hour. But also he'll do grocery store work if you pay him, I don't know, 30 an hour, maybe 35, 40, because it also reduces his burden. He doesn't have to work as hard. So that's the amount of money you have to pay. It's a small amount of money. Now we gave two examples in the Mishnah. We gave an example of we have a grocery store owner. We have two ways to deal with a grocery store owner. One is to give him a pallet of apples. One is to give him the money and tell him to buy the pallet of apples. Why both? With tzrich, it's necessary to give you both examples. Okay, in other words, if you give him money, he has to work a lot harder. If you give him a pallet and he runs a grocery store, it's a much easier work for him. So therefore, that's why you could pay him like this small fee, the difference between a blacksmith and a grocery store operator. Vitana mois likach Paris having a hospital with the bike of pile bottom should enough Turkey. In other words, if the Mishnah only gave the example of the guy who gave an investment money, the guy gave him the money to buy the pallet of apples, I would think that if you give them money, so he has to work hard. That's why you have to pay him pile bottle, like the difference between a blacksmith and a grocery owner. But if the guy doesn't have to work, doesn't have to go buy the apples, so he has even less work to do. So you don't even have to pay him that amount of labor. It would be sufficient if you paid him. In other words, the fact that you paid him by allowing him to eat lunch with you, that would be sufficient payment. You wouldn't have to pay him kischari bottle. You would have to pay him basically nothing, just a token payment, lunch basically. You have to give him something to dip some fish sauce to dip his bread in, basically. So tzricha. Therefore, the Mishnah has to give both examples. In both examples, the law is that you have to give him the difference in payment between whatever his regular job is and working in the grocery store. Okay, and now we got introduced more details into this concept. Tanar Rabbanon, Kamma huschari. How much do you have to pay him? Bein meruba or bein what? Div Rameir. Rameir says you have to give him something. It could be a lot. It could be a small amount, but it's got to be something significant. Rabbi Yehudah is more lenient. Rabbi Yehudah, if you allow him to dip his bread in the fish sauce, or if you give him a single date to eat, zehu schari, that's the payment. This is, by the way, what's done in the heteriska. What you give him is $1. And my father once worked for a mortgage broker, and they had the closing pack. They had all these heteriskas that had to be signed, and in the heteriska they had an envelope with $1 in it. They have a lot of envelopes with $1. They weren't the Rebbe giving $1. It's a heteriska. You have to give the guy $1 to pay him for the so-called investing. Okay. Shimon Yochai says, "Nicely schari mishalom, you got to pay the full salary." Tanar Rabbanon, Ein Shaman. Okay, so now we'll apply these opinions in practice. Tanar Rabbanon, Ein Shaman loyes izim loyes or chelim v'loy kol davar she'ein oisav oichel lamechza. Okay, 1 second. Okay, a payment must be given for any animal she'ein oisav oichel lamechza. Okay, that means that certain animals, the rancher actually benefits from having those animals around. So, for example, let's say he's raising a donkey, and donkey is mostly mature. Now it's just gonna be a year or two, and then it'll be it has to be trained a little bit. It'll be a pack animal. But until then, the guy has sort of a less good pack animal, and that is a payment. The fact that he gets to use a useful animal. Same thing with a horse. He gets to ride it. He gets to move around town. Certain animals give no use whatsoever. Those animals, you have to pay him the fee for managing the animals. But animals that have use, you don't have to pay them fee. One second. Okay, so as examples of animals that aren't useful, we have izim. These are goats, or chelim. A rochel is a sheep. So you have sheep and goats. Rabbi Yehudah says, no, sheep and goats, those are also useful. The goats, they provide milk. That's an income, right? It's free milk. These sheep, they provide wool. Shaitfis means that some of the wool comes off when they go through the water, and you can keep that wool. Umartais. Same thing when they run through thorn bushes. Also, some of the wool gets shorn off, and you can keep that wool. So this is sort of a fringe benefit here. There's a tiny goylets and chicken. And chickens also provide a benefit for the chicks, for the egg, potentially for the eggs, depending on what exactly the relationship is. We'll see examples of raising chickens, but potentially if you're raising the chicken for slaughter, it might give you eggs along the way, and that's a fringe benefit. And that's considered the payment for the work. Okay, Kamma gizav cholav leisipik leschar amolai u'mezayne. The rabbis say that sharing the wool and the milk, it's not sufficient. One second. I'm sorry. The Gemara asks us as a question. Is it the case that the milk and the wool is not enough? So the Gemara says no. Everyone agrees that if these things are kept by the investor, then it's not considered a payment, and if they're kept by the rancher, then it is considered a payment. However, the debate is where he doesn't even get the milk, he's getting the suvi, he's getting the whey, or tuture. These are sort of strands of wool. He's not getting to share the animal. These things, Tanakama the Tanakama, the first opinion, the unauthored opinion, holds like Rav Shimon bar Yochai that you have to pay a full payment, and this is a joke. This is not a payment. This is like token. You're giving the guy tokens. You're not giving him anything of real value. And basically, Rabbi Yehudah's opinion that all you have to pay him is a token. You have to give him some fish juice to dip his bread in. The rabbis taught maskeres isha lechaverta tarnagolas b'shnei afreichim. A woman is allowed to rent her chicken to her friend for two chicks a year. So what's going on here? I'm not exactly sure how this business works. Practically speaking, I'm not so familiar with this. From what I understand, the business, she has a chicken, female bird, and the bird sits on eggs. Mm-hmm. So the renter provides eggs for fertilized eggs for the birds, and the bird incubates it. It sits on the eggs, and it hatches many chickens every year. So what's the payment for the rent? What's the rent payment? 2 chicks. That's the cost of the female chicken. Okay, for two chickens. Okay. However, so the first example is case of a lease. This is perfectly legitimate. There's no ribbis here. There's a lease, and the payment for the lease is 2 chicks. However, now the woman is getting clever, and she's setting up an iska, a business relationship. Mm-hmm. Here's where the ribbis comes in. So this is like, I have the chickens, you have the chicks. let's go and let's split the profits. My chicken is gonna incubate your eggs. So here's going to be the deal. We'll split the chicks. We're both sort of combining into a venture here, and I'm giving you the chicken, you give the eggs, you're doing the work, and I get half the chickens. Is this a problem? Do you have to pay? Does the egg supplier, fertilized egg supplier, have to pay the chicken owner? Sorry. The chicken owner here is considered sort of the investor. She is providing her chicken, and the egg supplier has to do the work. But the chicken owner gets to keep half of the egg supplier's profits. Right? The fertilized egg supplier is doing the work. She's fertilizing the eggs. She's providing the eggs. She's making sure they're incubated and they hatch. And the chicken owner doesn't do anything other than supply her chicken. So does she have to make a payment of a work payment so that there's no ribis to the woman supplying the fertilized eggs? So Rabbi Yehudah says this is legitimate. There's nothing wrong. Rabbi Shimon says it's prohibited. Rabbi Yehudah does Yehudah not require that in any business venture where there's a split between responsibility and loan, that the investor has to give a payment, at least something, to the one who's actually doing the work of the business? So Gemara says, no, he does hold that you do have to make a payment, but what is the payment? Ikabates and meisers. So there's certain types of eggs, certain types of fertilized eggs that will never hatch. Not every egg is viable, and the Gemara says that there are certain types of eggs. These types of eggs, based meisers, that these are fertilized eggs that will never hatch, that they actually taste very good. Apparently, they're delicious. So you have to be careful. The blood spot is a whole thing. But how to identify the difference between an egg with a blood spot and baits and meisers, separate question. But regardless, the woman keeping the eggs gets to keep those eggs. So therefore, that is her payment for the work. 46. What's up here?
Rabbi, question.
Yes.
If I shares the stock in Elbit, works in Israel. Another rabbi raised the question.
Ribis.
Buying stock in Israeli companies. Is there a problem?
I don't know what to tell you. I think that the Israeli price can tend to be. You're buying this in an American market or an Israeli market?
I'm buying it, I guess, through the American Stock Exchange. It's offered there.
Yeah. Generally speaking, the American price scheme don't really consider stock ownership to be significant, and the reason for that is because you're last. Don't really own the thing. You're the last in line for payments.
That's
And-
true. Bond
and
holders
you don't-
come first.
Yeah.
Okay, what about my realtor handling our house purchase in Highland Park is Jewish, goes to shul, that kind of stuff. Any ribis issues there? Because I thought there's maybe, that came up a little bit tangentially in our discussions. Is there any kind of issue there, either through the buyer or the seller end or the realtor end, or any of that?
If anything, it'd be the mortgage company, and it could be if you're buying from a religious person. If there's an early bird discount, you might want to figure that one out.
I don't think these.
I don't
people
think so.
buy from a religious.
Yeah, and even then, it's unlikely to happen. And then
Okay.
the mortgage company is the biggest one.
What?
Mortgage company is the biggest one.
All right.
The realtor you're paying,